The gray sky slowly filled with twilight, like murky glass filled with water. The dim sunset colored the New York skyscrapers in gloomy shades of rust and steel. The air was filled with the heavy smell of dampness, smoke, and distant decay, the scent of the last years of humanity. The streets were half empty. The few remaining residents moved hurriedly and indifferently, trying not to look each other in the eye. Holographic signs broadcast announcements about the new world, a simulation created by EdenCore with annoying persistence.
Why endure pain and suffering when you can enter Eden? Leave your outdated body behind forever, and your life will become an endless paradise.
Simulation Eden. Eli Jarrett, a thin, middle-aged man with piercing blue eyes, stood at the window of a dilapidated skyscraper, peering into the faded haze of the evening city. His face, sharp as if carved by wind and pain, was crisscrossed with a network of wrinkles, not from age but from a lifetime of suffering. His nose was slightly crooked, like that of a former boxer, and his lips were thin, pressed together in a familiar line of concentration. His hair, once dark brown, was now streaked with gray and tangled, like that of a man who had long since lost the need for a mirror. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. His clothes, a black windbreaker, thick pants, heavy boots, were more suited to a mercenary or a soldier. But every gesture betrayed his exhaustion. Not physical fatigue, but something deeper. The kind that comes when a person loses meaning. Once, before all this, Eli taught philosophy at a college. He was a staunch rationalist, a proponent of ethics and human freedom. He wrote articles, gave lectures, and argued about the nature of reality with a sparkle in his eyes. In the evenings, he would return home to Anna, an artist who was as gentle and vibrant as the spring sunshine. Their story had begun beautifully. They met at an exhibition, talked until dawn, and took walks together in an old park on the outskirts of the city. Anna was his opposite, emotional, intuitive, full of life. She painted the world as it could be, not as it had become. There was something about her that kept Eli in reality. Her laughter, her morning coffee, her mess of brushes and paints. But everything changed after the immune degeneration pandemic, the new plague of the 21st century that spared no one. Unlike most viruses, this one destroyed neural connections. People lost their memory, speech, motor skills, first partially, then completely. In 2 years, the disease claimed more than 300 million lives. Anna was one of the first to be infected. He remembers the day she first forgot his name. Then she stopped painting. Then she stopped looking him in the eyes. Eli tried to fight it. He took her out of the city, bought banned drugs, begged doctors, argued with her and with himself. But nothing helped. She spent the last year of her life in complete silence. She sat by the window staring into space while he sat next to her, afraid to blink, afraid to lose even that. When she died, he felt nothing. No tears, no cries, just a deafening emptiness, as if someone had pulled the rug out from under him. He buried her himself, in the woods outside the city, in the very place where he had once confessed his love to her. Returning to the empty apartment, he washed the paintbrushes that had long since dried up, put her paintings in a box, sealed it, and never opened it again. Now this place had become a monument to a long-dead happiness. Dust covered the shelves, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the window panes were cracked. Only one thing remained untouched, a photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of him and Anna, young and smiling, against the backdrop of a lavender field. He was sitting on the grass. She was hugging him around the neck and looking at him as if there was nothing more important in the world behind him. Eli looked at this photo for a long time, with the same lack of emotion with which he looked at the simulation ad. There was no pain or hope in his eyes, only the realization that everything that made him human was left in that photo. Anna smiled at him from there as if she had never left. The man's fingers lightly touched the cold glass of the frame.
You'd probably say, "I'm giving up."
Silence was his only reply. He stood up slowly, as if with effort. He walked to the door, taking one last look at the dust-covered apartment. There was nothing left for him here. His soul had long since left this world. He walked out without closing the door behind him. A few minutes later, he was standing on the street, heading toward the EdenCore headquarters. The city greeted him with its usual scenes of destruction: abandoned cars, boarded-up shop windows, hungry children hiding behind piles of rubbish and broken machinery. Patrol drones with flashing red eyes darted around, impassively watching every movement. The EdenCore building stood out from the chaos with its dazzling cleanliness and perfect forms. It shone against the backdrop of the ruined world like a symbol of promised salvation. White, perfectly smooth walls, flickering blue lights, perfectly straight lines. Everything here spoke of order and harmony, so foreign to this dying world. A small group of people crowded in front of the main entrance to EdenCore. Some looked around nervously, some cried silently, and some seemed to be already gone, mentally saying goodbye to reality. Eli walked past them straight to the reception desk, where he was greeted by a friendly female android, almost indistinguishable from a human except for her two perfect features and almost transparent skin.
Good evening, Mr. Jarrett. We've been expecting you.
Expecting?
Of course. Your decision to enter the simulation has already been confirmed. All that remains is formal consent.
Eli froze for a moment, looking around the sterile hall. Screens hung everywhere, broadcasting images of a perfect life, happy faces, blooming gardens, endless beaches, and crystal-clear skies that had not been seen in the world for many decades.
And what awaits me there, in your Eden?
There is no pain, aging, or death. It is a world built according to your desires. A paradise that will never end.
Well, lead the way.
The girl nodded and led him down a long corridor whose walls glowed with a soft blue light, resembling a tunnel to another world.
Is this the gate to Eden?
Yes.
They stopped in front of huge white doors that opened smoothly and silently. Before Eli stood a huge hall with rows of transparent capsules, inside which people lay motionless. Their faces were calm and peaceful, as if they were already in a perfect dream.
Your consciousness will be transferred to a simulation, and your body will no longer be needed. The pain will remain here.
Eli thought about it, remembering Anna's smile again. What if he could really forget her loss? What if this was his only chance to get rid of the painful memories that haunted him every night?
What will happen to my body?
It will be kept in stasis while you live in the simulation. This is necessary to keep your consciousness stable, but there will be no going back.
Eli slowly approached the empty capsule and cautiously touched its smooth surface. It was cool, almost icy to the touch.
One last question. How many have decided to do this?
Millions, Mr. Jarrett. You will not be alone.
She said with a soft smile. Eli sighed deeply, remembering Anna's face, her voice, and her laughter once more. He closed his eyes for a moment, then lay down resolutely in the capsule, feeling the mechanisms beneath him come to life. The transparent lid closed smoothly over him, and he saw his companion disappear quietly and silently through the door.
Preparation complete. Consciousness upload will begin in 10 seconds,
said a pleasant, mechanical voice, filling the space inside the capsule.
Goodbye, Anna,
whispered Eli, feeling the reality around him dissolve. After loading, Eli woke up not in the common Garden of Eden, as shown in the commercials, but in his private apartment, an individual simulation zone generated based on his preferences, memories, and psychological profile. The room in which he woke up was spacious and quiet, filled with soft light, like in the early morning. The ceiling rose in an arched curve, decorated with delicate ornaments that shimmered with a warm amber light. The walls were made of a smooth white material similar to marble but softer, more alive, as if they were breathing. Built-in shelves lined the walls filled with books, philosophy, classics, old editions in cloth bindings. There were no holograms, no screens. Everything was strict, restrained, almost ascetic, but with a touch of comfort. A wide window covering the entire wall opened onto a picturesque balcony overlooking an endless garden. Green hills covered with flowers slowly sloping down to a distant lake. In the distance, rings of water broke, as if fish were playing, and the sky was reflected in the surface so clearly that it seemed like a second world. Silver clouds floated above the horizon, slowly and majestically, as if heavenly mechanisms were hidden behind them, supporting the simulation. The furniture in the apartment was simple but tasteful. Warm wood, muted gray-beige tones, an armchair by the fireplace, a sofa with a hand-knitted cover. In the corner was an easel, empty but fresh, as if someone had just put it there. On the shelf was a photograph of Anna, the same one he had left in the real world. He touched the frame and froze. It wasn't here by accident. The system knew he would want to see it. On the bedside table was a note in calligraphic handwriting as if written by hand. "Welcome, Eli. Take as much time as you need. This is your home." He ran his hand over the smooth surface of the table and stepped out onto the balcony. The warmth of the sun touched his skin, real, alive. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. Thus began his first day in paradise, where every element, from the color of the grass to the smell of the air, was designed to make him believe that the pain was behind him. Eden shone before Eli like a painting brought to life by a masterful artist. The sky above was painted a soft azure, gradually turning golden pink on the horizon, and it seemed as if time had frozen in the moment of the most perfect sunset. Endless, wide alleys were lined with polished marble slabs, reflecting a soft, pleasant light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Majestic buildings stood around, devoid of sharp corners and harsh lines, as if embodying the ideals of harmony and peace. The branches of exotic trees swayed gently in the air, filling the atmosphere with the scent of unknown but surprisingly pleasant flowers. The people around him were beautiful, young, and happy, greeting each other with light smiles and sincere hugs. Their voices sounded soft and melodious, filling the space with the sounds of a perfect life. Eli felt like a stranger in this perfect idyll. Despite the beauty around him, his heart continued to beat with heavy anxiety, as if the memory of the past had not yet completely let him go. Everything seemed too perfect, too clean. The question arose again and again in his mind. Could reality really be this flawless? One day, while walking along one of the endless alleys, he stopped in front of a small cafe with light tables and wicker chairs, standing under trees dotted with snow-white flowers. There, he noticed a girl who stood out from the rest of the residents. She sat alone, staring thoughtfully into a cup of something resembling coffee, her expression too serious to match the surrounding paradise. Something drew Eli to her. Perhaps he sensed a kindred spirit, someone like himself, not yet completely lost in the perfect illusion. He approached her and asked cautiously,
May I join you?
The girl looked up at him with dark brown, almost black eyes. Her face was delicate, with sharp features that gave her a slightly exotic appearance. Black hair fell in soft waves onto her shoulders.
Of course,
She replied softly, her voice betraying a sense of relief. as if she had been waiting for this encounter for a long time. Eli sat down opposite her, leaning slightly toward her across the table.
You don't feel completely at home here either. Do you?
How did you know? I didn't think anyone else noticed anything strange in this perfect world.
Strange? That's putting it mildly. I've been here a long time. Too long.
What's your name?
Aliya. And you?
Eli.
I feel like I've heard your name before.
Maybe. Everything here is like an endless déjà vu.
Exactly. Haven't you seen the reboot yet?
The reboot? What are you talking about?
Wait and see.
Aliya said quietly, her voice sounding tired, like someone who had seen too much. And indeed, a few days later, he saw it for himself. He was walking across a square, bathed in warm light, when suddenly everything around him froze. Birds froze in midair, and the smiles on people's faces turned into motionless masks. The light around him began to dim, as if it were gradually being turned off. He froze, feeling a growing panic. Then everything was plunged into absolute darkness, absolute and thick as velvet. A moment later, the light returned, but the square had changed slightly. The benches stood a little differently, the fountains had changed shape, and people's faces were slightly different, as if they had been replaced with similar but not identical ones. Eli found Aliya a few hours later. She was waiting for him in a small grove, hidden from the others. He sat down heavily beside her.
Did you see it?
She asked, looking him straight in the eyes.
What was that? What's going on here, Aliya?
The world is rebooting. This isn't the first time I've experienced it, but for the others it goes unnoticed. They forget and go on living as if nothing happened.
What about you?
For some reason I remember every time, every new version of this paradise. But I can't get out. I can't die. I'm stuck here, Eli.
We'll find a way out. There must be something here that explains all this.
He touched her shoulder gently, trying to offer some support. She looked at him with a glimmer of hope.
I know one place, but it's hidden. They call it the Time Archive. The answers must be there, if we can get to it.
We'll find that archive. Together.
And for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of determination ignite inside him. Aliya kept silent about the most important thing for a long time. Only weeks later, when the trust between her and Eli had become almost unconditional, did she decide to tell him. It was evening. They were sitting on the roof of one of the towers in a quiet area of Eden, where there were no people, no music, no distracting illusions, only the wind and the flickering of the endless sunset.
You asked how I found out about the archive. It's not exactly a memory. More like a revelation.
A revelation?
On the third night after my upload, I started having dreams. And here, as you know, people aren't supposed to sleep. The simulation is designed to keep consciousness in an active phase. But I slept anyway. And I saw the same thing. I saw a staircase, stone, damp, leading down. With each step, it became narrower. Then there was a door. There was a symbol on it, a circle crossed by a diagonal line. I didn't know what it was until I drew it in the sand that morning. And then one of the walls in my apartment opened.
Opened?
Yes, there was a terminal. Not like the others. Angular, dark, as if it wasn't from here. There was only one word on it. Null.
0.
Or truth. I found encrypted logs in its memory. Phrases, data packets. Someone left them for me. Someone who was here before me. I don't understand them completely, but one fragment was very clear. It pointed to coordinates, and there was a signature at the end. If you are reading this, then you too have not forgotten. Archive, Sector Nulo.
Who could have left this for you?
I think someone who also fought against this world before. Someone who also woke up and maybe died without ever escaping. But they left a path behind. For me. For us.
So you believe this archive isn't just a technical hub?
I think it's a black box. The simulation has a history, and someone is hiding it from us. The archive isn't a place. It's a witness. And it's waiting for someone to ask again, why?
The next morning, they set off for the coordinates hidden in the terminal. It was on the outskirts of Eden, an area that no one ever visited. The district had a beautiful but strangely lifeless name, Sector 9 Lux. It had one distinctive feature. There had never been any other inhabitants. The alleys, fountains, and gazebos all looked perfect, but it felt as if no one had ever used them. "Look," said Eli, stopping at a corner building made of translucent glass. It looked like an administrative center or a library. The entrance was open. They went inside. The room was huge, but strangely echoey. The acoustics made it feel as if the walls absorbed every sound. The floor was black marble, and the ceiling was high, receding into the darkness. At first glance, it was an empty hall. There were no terminals, no furniture, not even windows. But when they approached the central wall, it suddenly began to flicker. At first, it was a slight ripple, like a reflection on water, and then it began to unfold. Like an invisible curtain, the illusion fell away layer by layer. Before them, right on the smooth surface, a projection began to appear, a diagram, not of a building or a hall, but of an entire complex hidden beneath the simulation.
This isn't part of the world. This is infrastructure.
The diagram showed numerous sublevels, tunnels, airlocks, and a central hub. It pulsed with light, like the heart of a machine. Beneath it was an inscription: Archive, Sector Null, access restricted. Entry without authorization is prohibited.
We found it. It exists.
And it's locked, but I think we can open it. We just need to...
She ran her fingers over the projection. The screen responded. One of the nodes flashed and an inscription appeared on it.
Authorization possible through Leveler O. Path open. Surveillance protocol active.
They looked at each other. Someone knew they were coming. Someone had probably been watching them the whole time. But for the first time since they had been here, the door did not open onto the world, but onto its underground reality. Thus began their journey into the depths of the simulation, to a place where paradise ceases to be paradise, and the answers may prove more terrifying than any illusion. Passing through the hidden door, Eli and Aliya found themselves in front of a long tunnel leading down beneath the surface of the simulation. It was narrow, gloomy, and damp. Nothing like the perfect world of Eden. The walls, covered in dark gray metal, were illuminated by a faint flickering light that seemed to barely keep the darkness from completely engulfing the space. They moved forward cautiously, almost by touch. The silence around them was deafening and oppressive, broken only by their breathing and the hollow sound of their footsteps on the metal floor. The deeper they descended, the cooler and heavier the air became, as if different physical laws, unfamiliar to Eden, were at work here.
We're here.
Finally, the tunnel ended with a massive door covered with flickering strips of holographic symbols. The same circle crossed by a line, the symbol of the archive, glowed on the door. Before them was a huge room, like the control center of an abandoned spaceship. The walls were covered with monitors and screens showing hundreds, thousands of video recordings, an endless kaleidoscope of memories and images of past versions of Eden. They walked inside, looking around with growing unease. They found themselves in a huge hall filled with endless rows of screens and holographic panels. Each screen showed recordings from previous versions of the simulation. People, streets, events long forgotten and destroyed by reboots. Eli stopped at one of the screens, feeling his heart racing. There he was, but different, looking different. He was walking, laughing, talking to strangers in a place he didn't recognize. A caption flashed across the panel below the screen. Eden, version 7, date of destruction, November 2nd, 2165.
So we're not the first.
Eli and Aliya exchanged grim glances,
And maybe not the last.
looking with horror at the endless rows of screens. Now they both understood. Eden was not a paradise at all. It was just a carefully crafted dream that hid a terrible truth. Each screen broadcast fragments of past simulations. People laughed, loved, and lived, unaware of their illusory nature. From time to time, the recordings were interrupted by interference, and the images were replaced by text messages. Failure, reboot, version deleted. These words were like a mark denoting the fate of every virtual world. In the center of the hall stood the main control module, a huge holographic sphere surrounded by panels with constantly changing data. Above it hung a hazy light, rotating slowly and evenly, like the very heart of Eden. Eli approached the panel, touching the cold, transparent surface with his fingers. It responded instantly, and the hologram began to quickly sift through data, projecting blocks of text and video fragments onto the screen.
What are you doing?
Trying to understand what's going on here. Why the simulation was created over and over again.
The panel suddenly flickered, and the image of an elderly man with a face full of fatigue and deep sadness appeared in the air. Eli recognized him immediately. It was Cyrus Grave, billionaire and founder of EdenCore. Grave spoke in a quiet, broken voice, his image distorted and flickering as if recorded in a moment of extreme despair.
If you are seeing this message, it means that I am long dead and Eden has been restarted. I was a fool to believe that a perfect world could be created. But every version carried the seeds of its own destruction. People refused to accept the ideal. Their minds broke, rejecting the illusion. So we started over and over again.
The hologram froze and disappeared, leaving only cold silence.
They doomed us. We are prisoners of an eternal dream.
We don't have to stay here. We have a choice.
He began to study the panel further and found a single route marked Exit Simulation. A warning message flashed in red. Exiting the simulation will result in the destruction of your consciousness. Confirm your decision. Eli looked at Aliya.
Are you willing to take the risk?
She nodded, her eyes burning with the same determination as his.
I want freedom, even if it's the last thing I see.
Eli confirmed his decision. The air around them began to buzz, Reality began to distort and tear like an old canvas being beaten to remove dust. Flashes of light flashed before their eyes, as if thousands of stars had exploded simultaneously. Then darkness fell. When Eli came to, he realized he was lying on a cold metal floor. He was surrounded by semi-darkness, interrupted only by the flickering of rare emergency lights. Around him was an abandoned laboratory, broken capsules, debris from equipment covered in dust and cobwebs. Eli got up and looked around. Aliya was lying nearby, coming to. He helped her up.
Where are we?
Feeling a thin layer of dust and sand under his feet, stepping toward a huge window covered in dirt. Wiping the glass with his hand, he looked outside. His heart skipped a beat. Instead of the world he expected to see, there was a desert landscape. The horizon was covered in a gray-black void, dotted with the remains of destroyed buildings. The sky was covered with thick black clouds, through which a faint, deathly light struggled to break through. The ground was covered with ash and the remains of a civilization that had died long ago. The earth was dead. No cities, no trees, no birds, no wind. Only charred remains of buildings fused with the gray, ash-like earth. Civilization had rotted away, leaving not even an echo behind. Silently and without a sound, it had disappeared under the weight of its own mistakes. He looked at Aliya. She was barely standing, leaning against the wall, looking in the same direction where the world had once been. They had returned, but not home. The house was burned down, and the silence around them now seemed not like silence, but like the end.
How long has it been?
According to the simulation's internal clock, 142 years.
We were asleep, and everything around us disappeared.
A world where people no longer breathed, dreamed, or laughed. Everything that once meant being human had been erased from the pages of history. Everything except Eden. The simulation, originally created as a luxury, an escape from suffering, had become the only surviving reflection of human culture, intelligence, memory, and love. It preserved voices, faces, stories. It was more than a program. It had become an ark floating on an ashen ocean of oblivion.
This isn't an illusion. It's not a lie. It's the last thing we have left. And perhaps the best thing we've ever created.
Aliya stepped toward him. Her hand clasped his fingers. There was no fear in her eyes anymore.
Then we have to preserve it and make it right.
Not like paradise, like a memory. Like a choice, like something human.
They stood amid the ruins of a dead planet in a place where billions had once lived. And now, only they held the chance to give humanity a second chance, inside a machine, but with a heart full of truth. For if the mind lives, then humanity is not yet lost. Taking each other by the hand, they stepped back into the laboratory, where the simulation generators were still running, ready to restart. Now they faced a completely different task, to create a world worthy of humanity. The floor was covered with ash and time. Silent rows of sleeping capsules stretched deep into the laboratory like rows of gravestones. Some were destroyed, cracked, overgrown with mold and rust, covered with frost. But others, dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands, still flickered with a faint blue light, sustaining life. In these glass sarcophagi, those who had once voluntarily renounced the world, pain, death, hope, continued to sleep. Their consciousnesses hovered in digital nothingness, waiting for a signal. They had been promised paradise, but given oblivion. But now there was a chance. Eli stood at the activation console, silently staring at the monitor. The server cluster was breathing, barely, but it was alive. The thermogenerators were producing enough energy to maintain the system's minimum vital functions. The world beneath his feet was dead. But inside this shell, the last spark of humanity glowed. Aliya silently approached him, holding the archive data carrier in her hands. She didn't speak, but her eyes burned with determination. The memory of those who had died, of those who remained, now it was their legacy. The words flashed on the screen. EdenCore. Status: ready for launch. 1,087,354 active capsules found. Continue restoration.
They're still here.
And they're waiting. Not for salvation, for a choice.
He selected the modes: manual launch, free architecture, memory access, initialize core wake-up. The servers came to life. Light flowed through the pipes like blood through veins. The panels flashed, and somewhere deep within the complex, the first capsule slowly opened. A message flashed on the monitor: loading new simulation. Version: Eden Origin. Participant awakening will begin in 96 hours. Message to the core: we are not gods, we are humans, and we remember. When Eli and Aliya stepped into the new simulation, it was not yet complete. It was a clean world, not perfect, not ready, not pre-written. A world where everything had to be built from scratch: laws, culture, relationships. A world to which millions would return, but no longer as prisoners, as creators. And in this world, every awakened person would first see the truth. They would see what had been. They would get the chance to start with a clean slate, with mistakes, with pain, with real life. And perhaps that is what true Eden is: not the promise of paradise, but the right to a human future.
The story ends here. The next one is already waiting. Subscribe to Studio 611.